Dad, I'm totally going to do that. I'm going to go to film school. And he's like, no, that's not what I was thinking. And ever since then, he's never liked the decision. But when I was there, when I went to film school, I had a teacher who actually taught Heath Ledger. And it was kind of interesting to be taught by someone who knew someone so famous, right, Heath Ledger. And she had to pivot her teaching after the untimely death of Heath Ledger. And she changed the way she taught and everything. And she was like the super famous lady, right? Russian, no one knew what she was saying. And there's one exercise that she did in this acting class, Acting 101, where essentially a room 3 times this size, right? It's a green screen room. She would get the class of 60, put them in a giant circle, like huge awkward circle. And everybody would sit down, crisscross applesauce, and one by one she would go around and name a thing, and you had to act the thing. You had to behave that like the thing, you had to believe that you were the thing, and you had to belong as if you were the thing. So she goes around and she just says something, giraffe, and then the student would stand up, and they would be a giraffe. And it was super cringy. It was super weird. And this was like my first acting class ever. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? This is so weird, right? This is like the church my dad went to. So, it's my turn. And the first thing that I'm told to do is chair. I'm like, oh, that's easy. I don't have to say anything. I just kind of do a chair. And I can do a chair. Yeah. And then she's like, I don't believe you. What? And then she goes around again. And she didn't believe me. She didn't believe that I was a chair. So, the next thing comes around, I think I'm supposed to be a tree or something. I'm like, okay, tree. And then she's like, no, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't believe you're the tree. I was like, okay, fine. Give me something real that's like alive. And she's like, okay, be a vacuum. Again, I'm in front of 60 people in the middle of a circle being a vacuum. And I'm on my hands and knees, and it's so bad, it's so terrible, that my teacher's like, did you mishear me? Did you think I said elephant? She thought I was an elephant. She thought I was trying to be an elephant. So, needless to say, I am not a good actor. She thought my vacuum impersonation was, in fact, an elephant. But what's interesting about the kingdom of God is it's kind of like that acting class where Jesus commands us to change and transform. And we see this all over scriptures. That for me, in film school, to be an actor, I had to behave, believe, and belong as actors do. Hang out with actors, I talked like actors, oh yeah, the method. And then I would behave like them, right? Super like cringy. But to be a Christian is kind of the same thing. Where you have to, I mean, it's not cringy, but you have to behave, believe, and belong to Jesus. You have to behave, believe, and belong to Jesus. You might be thinking, that's cute. Did you make that up? No, I stole it. So there's this guy, Benjamin J. Marcus. He's a religious studies scholar, and he developed this framework to kind of help people understand their faith. Understand, hey, what does it mean to be a part of Islam, Christianity, all that. And he created the 3B framework, which is taught in public schools today and in a lot of school curriculum, to essentially help people understand, like, hey, you know, Protestants really think, Christians like us, right, we're Protestant. A lot of us think it's just belief. I just believe in the right things, and that's it. I'm done, right? I believe Jesus is God, I do this, but Ben actually argues that no, it's all of you. Your whole identity is wrapped up in your religious pursuit. So you behave differently, you believe differently, you belong to Jesus in that way. But then again, today's teaching is about come and be the kingdom of God. And to be is to become something new, right? As Christians, we are called to transform into the image of Christ. And to become something new is going to require all of you. You are going to change and transform over time. So to be the kingdom, to come and be the kingdom of God, is the way of Jesus. This was the way that he was sharing. So Jesus is inviting the 12 in the chapter we're going to read today to be the kingdom. Come and be the kingdom of God. So let's go to chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. And we'll break this down. So, this first section is the 12 sent out. It's a very famous part of the gospel where Jesus is essentially saying, hey, I'm going to give you guys power over demonic forces. I'm going to give you the ability to heal people, and you're going to preach the gospel, travel around, and you're going to go beyond, where we're currently at, And it wasn't just nearby local places they were supposed to travel. They were supposed to go everywhere, right? Jesus commanded them to go everywhere. So this is the beginning of Jesus' third tour, is to kind of kick it off with, hey, go spread the word. Go share the gospel. Go do these things. But let's read about what actually happened. So verse 1. And he called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. And he said to them, quote, take nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not have 2 tunics. And whatever house you enter, stay there, and from there depart. And wherever they do not receive you, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them. But they departed and went through the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. Now what's interesting is I was trying to understand this passage a little, and basically the initial command from Jesus was to go out to as far as you can go, right? And then come back. And what kind of happened here is the 12 went out and they kind of just went to places they knew, is what some Bible commentators kind of point out, is they kind of went to what was familiar. They didn't necessarily follow the command. They kind of went in their own power, even though they had the power of God. So this is really interesting because it's the first time the 12 are invited to come and be the kingdom of God. It's a higher level of calling. Jesus is calling them from come and follow me, come and see what I do, now come and be the kingdom, right? Come and be the kingdom to your neighbor, to those who are not your neighbors. Go everywhere and preach the gospel. And they kind of did so-so. They did all right? They came back, they did the thing. They were commanded to behave differently. And they did an okay job. What's interesting too is one thing to point out with this passage is some of the cultural context here. So if we go to verse, where is it? I think it's 5. So go to verse 5. The whole shake off the dust from your feet thing. This usually comes up when we read this passage. Just wanted to clarify real quick before we move on. So this really means 2 things. There's the literal meaning of it and the cultural meaning of it. So literally, yes, it means, hey, shake off your feet. If someone doesn't want to listen to you, that's fine, move on, right? They're responsible for sharing the gospel, but they were not responsible for people's reactions to the gospel. But then the other thing that a lot of people miss is that this verse infers that they're going to go to unclean lands. So if you are familiar with the stories of Moses, Joshua, things like that, whenever the people of God were on unholy ground, they would take their shoes off, they would dust off their feet. So this was also a cultural thing that the Jewish people did. So kind of a little more layered than our American understanding of that verse. So they were called to go to clean lands where the Jewish people were, and unclean lands where the Jewish people weren't. But then we go to this next passage that really threw me off, verses 7 through 9. Let's check it out. Now Herod the Tetrarch, it's a big fancy word for he owns a fourth of the kingdom, heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed, confused, bewildered, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had risen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him. So in this process of the disciples being the kingdom, word quickly spreads. And Herod Antipas, it's kind of his name, I don't know how to say it, it's just the word that Google said. Herod Antipas, he's confused. He's like, did I just kill that guy that told me not to sleep with my brother's wife? Like, he's back? He's alive? Is he Elijah? Like, what's going on, right? And Herod was like a terrible person, right? Just to quickly recap, he divorced his first wife and married his half-brother's wife in secret while visiting his brother. And then word got out that this happened, and John calls him out. He's like, hey, this is like wrong. This is sinful. But he was also intimidated by John the Baptist. More importantly, he was intimidated by the movement and the power John the Baptist seemed to have over people. So the fact that Herod is kind of perplexed here is now he's connecting the dots. Oh, I killed the wrong guy. John the Baptist was kind of the decoy. Jesus is the real thing. I want to know more about this guy. Quote, and he sought to see him. Because again, he was intimidated by John the Baptist. He killed John for calling him out. But now he needs to confirm that Jesus isn't John, that Jesus is not Elijah, that Jesus is not going to take away this power struggle that was going on because Herod's father, Herod the Great, died. So there was kind of a power struggle in the kingdom. So word continues to spread of come and be the kingdom. The disciples got the word out. Herod hears about what's going on. And then we jump to verses 10 through 17, where the people now hear, and the people want to engage with Jesus. So, starting in verse 10. On their return, the apostles told him all that they had done, and he took them and withdrew to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him, and he welcomed them, and spoke to them of the kingdom of God, and cured those who had need of healing. Now the day began to wear away, and the 12 came and said to him, send the crowd away to go into the surrounding villages and countryside to find lodging and get provisions, for we are here in a desolate place. Some scholars think this is Peter because he was like the only dad in the group, so he's like super concerned with it. Like, hey, we don't have anything for you. Go home, right? I gotta feed my own kids, right? Get out of here, right? And then Jesus replies, but he said to them, you give them something to eat. Basically, oh, you guys had my power. You went and did these miraculous things. Now here's the next step. You don't have that anymore. You have me. I'm right here. I'm watching. I'm seeing you. You feed them. You do this. You take this step of faith. Then they said, verse 13, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we are to go and buy food for all these people. For there were about 5,000 men, which roughly means a minimum of 20,000 people, assuming that each man was married, and each man probably had more than one kid, because that's just how it worked back then, right? So they only counted the men. So really the feeding of the 5,000 was probably the feeding of 20,000. Way more people than they were planning. Way more than 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So Jesus is like, okay. Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. And they did so, and had them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, Jesus, said a blessing over them. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, to set before the crowd. And they all ate and were satisfied. And what was left over was picked up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. So, Jesus is challenging the 12 and their belief in him. Like, hey, yeah, go and talk to people one-on-one. Go do some crazy miracles. You might heal some people. You might cast out demons. Pretty metal stuff. Now it's the next step. Feeding 20,000 people, right? Jesus is continuing to challenge the 12's belief in him. Who do you say I am? The people say this. Herod thinks this. Who do you say I am? And we'll get to what they say in a bit. But he's also inviting them to do the impossible and then demonstrating that the impossible is possible when God is involved. So he invites them like, hey, go ahead, feed all these people, right? Feed the 20,000, the 5,000 men, and whoever came with them, right? And they're like, we can't do that. Cool, I can. Boom. Right? Jesus invites them to do the impossible and then does it. But then we hear about Herod, and he's confused. He doesn't really know who this Jesus guy is. We hear about the people. They're like, oh, cool, this guy does like cool magic tricks. We're going to go watch him, right? And we're going to get a free meal too. But what did the disciples think of Jesus? So let's go to verse 18. Now it happened that as he was praying alone, after the events of the feeding of the 5,000, after he was praying alone, the disciples were with him. And he asked them, who do the crowds say that I am? Right? So the crowds would have been yelling stuff, chanting, they're cheering, they're having a good time. It's like a football game, right? The crowds, they're just like, this guy's crazy. He says cool things, he does magic tricks. But then Jesus is getting real with the disciples. Okay, they had a good time, they got a free meal, all that. Who do you say I am now that you've gone out, now that you are coming and being the kingdom of God? And they answered. Some guys think you're John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of old has risen up from the dead, has risen. Then Jesus said to them, but who do you say that I am? And he's addressing all of them, addressing all the 12. And Peter's the one that steps up and answers, the Christ of God. See, Jesus being God knew the rumors about him. He knew that Herod was sweating bullets because he thought he killed the guy that called him out, and now he thinks he's alive again, so Herod's tripping. And then the people are confused on who Jesus is. They're not quite sure. Could be a prophet, could be someone new on the block. But Peter knew clearly who Jesus was, even if he didn't understand all that Jesus was. In this moment, he knew, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ. So then Jesus, hearing this answer, he gets even deeper in relationship to his disciples. He starts filling them in on what's going on next, on why he's really here. Like, yeah, what we did today was really cool, guys. This was really fun. But here's why I'm really here. Verse 21. And he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So yeah, sure, there's the surface level of belonging, right? With the crowds, they do miracles, they hear about the gospel, but Jesus is letting the disciples in on something that he's slowly been trying to reveal to them for months. At this point, maybe a year and a half, right? He's been trying to explain why he's really here, what's really going on, the purpose of the ministry that they're doing. And he's foreshadowing the crucifixion here. He's foreshadowing what is to come, that on the third day, after being killed on the cross, Jesus will rise again, paying the penalty for sin, for death. He doesn't use all those words because it would confuse it, like people can't rise from the dead. But again, he's slowly introducing the concept that he is going to die and he is going to bring in the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. He is going to bring in the covenant of grace, the promise of grace, the end of the law, the end of the old and the beginning of the new. So then he ends this passage that we're in before we get into small groups by introducing the deepest level of belonging. Verses 23 through 27. Let's check it out. So Jesus said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed, when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God. So he introduces the deepest level of belonging. Yes, the crowds came, they had a good time. You 12 are different. I am introducing you to a deeper level of connection with me, a deeper relationship with me. This one has a cost. For the crowd, it's not much of a cost. You just walk a while, oh, free food, miracles, wow, that's so cool. For the 12, sorry, that was goofy. For the 12, for the disciples, it's different. He's calling them to something beyond what's comfortable, something beyond what they knew already. Hey, take up your cross, die for me, walk with me, follow me. There is a higher cost to following him now that he's introducing. And something that the disciples may have realized and probably didn't realize in that moment is that this deepest level of belonging, there's only really one response you can have which is that it requires humility and faith. God, this is a lot. How do I take up my cross, die to myself, deny everything that I want, and follow you? How do I lose my life? How do I do this, God? And it takes humility and faith. To be the kingdom, to be someone who follows the way of Jesus, requires humility and faith, because you can't do all these things on your own. This is the deepest level of belonging. This is why you are here. So, why does this matter? Well, before the kingdom of God arrived, Jesus invited the 12, and today he invites you to be the kingdom. Because for us, the kingdom is here and now, right? But for them, it was something that Jesus was introducing slowly over time to the crowds and to them. So before the kingdom of God arrived, Jesus invited the 12 to come and be the kingdom, to behave, believe, and belong to Jesus, to die to self, take up their cross daily, and follow him until the end and beyond. So the kingdom of God, and we'll talk about this in small groups before we break out, but the kingdom of God isn't a sacred space. I don't know if you can tell, but this is not a church. There are piñatas. My wife thinks they're floating heads, but they're obviously for Cinco de Mayo. This is a school. This is not a sacred space. We put up these tarp and drape. There's stuff behind here, right? Crazy. I don't even know what that is. I've been in school forever. But this is not a sacred space. It's just a building. This is not the kingdom of God. A church is not the kingdom of God, even if it's designed to be a sacred space. The kingdom of God is rather people empowered by God and his grace. The kingdom of God isn't a sacred space, but rather people empowered by God and his grace. And we'll talk more in detail, because that's a very simplified understanding of the kingdom of God, in our small groups. But for now, let's go and be the kingdom of God to all people in all places. All right, let's break out, guys.